Hi everyone. From the title of this video, you can tell that I'm going to be talking about the Hunger Games movies while playing some Call of Duty because I'm just trying to chill and get my thoughts out about these movies that I saw over the last week. So I had somehow went my entire life without watching the four Hunger Games movies that released a few years back, and I had a lot of people telling me that I should watch them, they were really good, and I watched them, and I have a lot of thoughts on them. Some good, some not so good. Let's get into it. So, starting off with the first movie, I really did love the first movie. I thought the first movie was just incredibly solid just all the way through. Opening up the story with this unbelievable premise of this reaping where this very rich capital in this like abusive society reaps children once a year and makes them fight to the death in an arena just for entertainment was really interesting. I really liked all of the capital political maneuvering that went on, where they would like put them on TV and showcase them to the world and just make a TV show out of these poor children's lives being taken away from them. Immediately when Primrose gets called and Katniss volunteers as tribute, she just becomes so likable so fast. And just her journey throughout the games was really incredible. I found this movie to be incredibly moving, which I was not expecting. Some parts that just really stood out to me were one, her relationship with Peta and the way it just kept growing and blossoming throughout the story. But the true highlight for me was her relationship with Rue. I really feel like, for all intents and purposes, that was the heart and soul of the movie. Like, it just shows a side of humanity that this world just wasn't really accustomed to seeing up until this point. And during this whole movie, I was just rooting for Katniss the whole time. And what's really interesting is at the end of the movie, she spends this whole time like fighting these other children basically, and you're rooting for her to win, but then you just remember like, nah, like this isn't the real enemy. These children, even the more vicious ones, are all victims of of a society that's taking advantage of them and abusing them. And when you realize that, it just adds a whole nother level of tragedy to it. And the number one thing about the first movie that I really liked and thought made it such a phenomenal movie is it is so well paced. It feels, it's like 2.5 hours long roughly, and it feels like you watched an hour maybe at times. It goes so incredibly fast while accomplishing so much, and it just feels right all the time. And the pacing of that first movie just really made it so fun because I felt like I was really engaged the whole time. There was never any downtime where I felt the story was lacking behind, which is something I can't say for the later movies, which we'll get into later about my frustration with some of these movies. And then I really like the ending where she disrespects the Capitol by saying, "Yeah, you're not getting your victory. You promised us that I can be with PETA, and that's what's going to happen." I thought that was a really awesome part of the story. And all in all, the first Hunger Games lived up to the hype. I completely understood why so many people love it. I understood why so many people went on to read the books after this first movie. Now, the second Hunger Games takes place, I think, literally starts immediately after the ending of the first movie. And I still really liked this Hunger Games. Hunger Games Catching Fire is still a solid movie. I think in a lot of ways, even though it ups the stakes, it kind of went down in terms of quality for me. And I think that is a byproduct of the stakes being raised. The first movie is just a very simple story of a girl in the reaping who finds hope and finds bravery in this incredibly tormented and messed up world. While the second one is where Katniss goes from just regular person to the fire for rebellion. That being said, I really loved all of the characters they introduced in the second movie. All of the other victors were super engaging. Specifically, I think is Fennec. Is that his name? I believe so. But also another character I loved from part one into part two was Haymitch. I thought he had a really good arc of just being this depressed guy with really nothing to live for to finding something to live for in these children that he feels he's responsible for now because he's their mentor. I really loved his character arc. But yeah, I thought Catching Fire was still really good. It was fun. I really liked the ending where she shoots the shoots the arrow, I should say, at the whole dome, basically knocking out the whole system. And even though I didn't love it as much as the first one, I would still say it was a really solid film overall, and I really enjoyed it. And I was really looking forward to how they were going to keep expanding the story. Because at this point, I was very well aware that Katniss was obviously going to be a symbol of rebellion for the final two movies. But what really concerned me going into Mockingjay Part 1 after Catching Fire was in expanding the scope, in splitting up Peta and Katniss, I was really worried they were going to lose kind of the core values of the story. And this is where I think a lot of my hot takes, and where a lot of you might start losing me here. Well, I will start losing a bunch of views right here with my takes on Mockingjay and Mockingjay Part 2. I thought Mockingjay Part 1 and Mockingjay Part 2 were a pretty big step down in terms of quality from the first two movies, and especially from the first movie. I think more than anything, what held these movies back for me was the pacing was just so unbelievably poor. It felt like the movies were shorter than the first two, which I didn't even know until I finished and looked at the timestamps. But Mockingjay Part 1 and Part 2 are significantly shorter than the first two, but they feel longer. And I'm okay with a slow burn story. I'm not one of these people that needs constant action or constant dopamine hits to stay engaged with the film. But it gets to a point where it just felt like scenes were dragging on for so much longer than they needed to be for the sake of dragging on. I don't understand why. I heard that I think these two movies were one book that was split into two movies, which would make sense as to why some scenes felt dragged out. But what was very ironic about Mockingjay Part 1 especially is while the story felt dragged out, it also felt like everything was moving so quickly. It felt like there were times where I couldn't even catch my breath because the story just was like, yep, this is what's going on now, no need for explaining, we're going to keep going. Another thing about this movie that I wasn't too fond of, while I understand why Katniss Everdeen's propaganda videos were necessary, I actually think that's a really interesting part of the movie, these propaganda shoots that they need to make in order to stir the rebellion. I think in their practical application, they just didn't work completely for me. What ended up happening was it felt like we had a character who at one point was very active in the story, had a lot of say in the story, had a lot of push and pull on what direction the story went. And then she just became a pawn in a much bigger story, which I understand is part of what makes a story potent, and that's one of its goals. But I just didn't enjoy it. I just did not enjoy it nearly as much as the first two movies. And another thing is, even though this was their original goal, Katniss Everdeen ends up going back to being a very active character anyway. So it kind of felt like she spent a movie and a half being very reactionary, not very active, just to kind of go back to who she was to begin with. So I thought that was a little bit of a letdown. But again, more than anything with Mockingjay Part 1, just the pacing. So many scenes felt dragged out. I felt like we were sitting on scenes for so long. And that was kind of it about Mockingjay Part 1. Now, I went into Mockingjay Part 2 just assuming it would be better, since I think another thing with Mockingjay Part 1 is it's all set up. And whenever you have a Part 1 movie, that Part 1's quality is almost, I don't say it's almost, it is very reliant on the Part 2 as well, because there's a lot of things it needs to set up and pay off. And I'm going to be honest, I thought Mockingjay Part 2 was possibly an even bigger letdown for me than Part 1, specifically because it was this much more important story because it was the ending. And I feel like aside from like the actual last few minutes, it just didn't stick the landing at all for me. So starting out Mockingjay Part 2, we end exactly where Part 1, we begin right where Part 1 ended with Peta trying to strangle Katniss and nearly succeeding. And I'm going to speak about Peta for a little bit here. I honestly thought his arc, in specifically Mockingjay Part 2, was very, very rushed. I feel like he was this brainwashed guy who had spent months in the Capitol being brainwashed and being tortured. And all of that just gets undone, not off screen, but I just don't feel we had enough moments with Peta to explain the massive change in his personality after he came back from the Capitol like all evil. I think it kind of just happened for the sake of the love story. And speaking of love stories, the romance between Peta and Katniss and the love triangle with Gale just went on for far too long. And I think especially at the end of Part 2, Gale doesn't have any character. He just becomes Katniss's other love interest that is kind of putting pressure on her and Peta's relationship. And they had a few scenes between Katniss and Gale and Peta and Gale where they talk about his relationship with Katniss, and I'm just like, dude, what have we seen on screen outside from you hunt for a little bit to justify you thinking you can compete with Peta and Katniss, who have just been trauma bonded and been through everything together. I thought that was such a like a funny thing in the story that just didn't need to be there, but it was, and I don't know why. But I think Mockingjay Part 2 has a lot of the problems that Part 1 has. It's just on a bigger scale because it's the end of the story. I think the pacing in Part 2 was really, really brutal. The entire part where they are going through the Capitol and there's pods everywhere, I thought that was probably the most contrived part of the entire story. Every time the Capitol did something with one of those pods, I sat there and I was just like, if we're being realistic, there is no way that the rebellion beats them. And maybe this is a byproduct of me being a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire and loving the way George R. R. Martin tells stories where you get explained literally everything. But you have to believe that the rebels can win in Mockingjay Part 1 and 2. And I just don't understand how they were able to rally such an unbelievable force just hidden in District 13. You know, in the first two movies, the Capitol is shown to be this force that no matter what you do, you can't beat them. They have eyes and ears everywhere. They have traitors in the actual districts feeding them information. I just don't understand how they were able to build up such a large force in District 13 without getting caught. It didn't work for me. It felt really forced. And I think the movie very much glances over all of those facts and all of those thoughts because they don't have like a real way to explain it. And they kind of just I'm assuming they beat the Capitol with just guns and stuff, because unfortunately we don't actually see the war, which sucked. That's another negative. I really wanted to see the actual war taking place. But just from those pods that the Capitol had, the stuff that they were pulling off with like the black goo, I just sat there and I was like, there is no way on earth they can realistically beat people that have such vast resources, such advanced technology compared to their very much like sticks and stones, bare bones warfare that they are running. Like they're so far behind them, it didn't make sense to me. But with all that being said, the actual ending of Mockingjay Part 2, like the final 20 minutes, I think were really solid. I think Katniss deciding, first of all, Coin being the one to drop the bombs on the children and kill Primrose Everdeen was a really good plot twist. I really liked the running theme that even though President Snow was just a diabolical human, the one thing he never did was lie to Katniss. He was always straight up with her, always told her the truth. And even when she didn't like it, he was at least honest about what he was doing. While Coin just manipulates the system so aggressively and they make her almost comically evil. And I really like that twist when Snow tells her, like, hey, like I was gonna give in, and she did that because of her own accord, because of her own desire for revenge and her own twisted way of thinking. I thought that was a really, really well done plot twist. And I kind of wish we got more of those plot twists in the final two Hunger Games movies. Aside from that, the execution scene where Katniss fires an arrow that should have been going towards Snow, but actually fired at Coin, was also really, really well done. I liked that twist of her knowing that even though Coin led the rebellion, she is not a good person, that in many ways she's just as bad as Snow. And I gotta say right now, I think I'm a little tired of the whole war is bad trope in fiction. While it's definitely true, and it's something that it's very important for people to understand, I think it's been overdone at this point. I think it's been a little overplayed. And I'm excited to hopefully get different takes on stories like this where, yes, war is bad, but when there's systems of oppression, you kind of have to do what you have to do sometimes. I want more stories like that, kind of like Andor Season 2 and Season 1. But yeah, at the end of Mockingjay Part 2, Katniss ends up going home with Peta. They end up having a family together, which I did like in theory, and I actually liked seeing her happy. But again, I think her and Peta's relationship just ended up being very rushed when all things were said and done, just because I don't think they earned him coming back to normal more than anything. But I did like that ending, and I'm actually going to be watching the prequel movie. I don't know what it's called. Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I believe. I'm going to be watching that movie probably tomorrow. So if you guys want, I can talk about that on my page and give you guys my thoughts on that movie as well. All in all, I'm glad I watched The Hunger Games. I thought the first two were just incredibly solid. I thought the final two were a bit of a letdown and a pretty good drop in quality from the first two. But I'm still happy I consumed the story, and I'm glad that it exists. I'm glad that it challenges the watcher in a lot of unique ways that other stories do not. I'm definitely happy I watched it. If I can give it a number, if I could rank every movie, I would probably give the first one like a good 9 out of 10. I would give the second one probably like I know people always joke like you can rank but you can't use 7, but I think I would give the second one like a true 6.5. Just a solid movie, maybe a 7, enjoyable, not my favorite but still good. And then I would give Mockingjay Part 1 and 2 like in theory a 9, but in actual practical experience and what we ended up getting, I'd probably give them like a 5. Like I didn't love those too much. I thought they were just kind of rough around the edges. Maybe even a 4 if I'm being honest. But all in all, that's kind of just my take on the Hunger Games series. Let me know in the future if you'd like to see more content like this, where I just kind of chill, maybe play some video games, or just talk to chat about video ideas and just kind of be more relaxed than most of my very formal content. So if you want to see these kinds of videos moving forward, just let me know in the comments down below. Let me know what other kind of movies you'd like me to see, because I am getting into movies for the first time in my life. I've seen a fair amount of movies, but not as much as I would like to. So let me know in the comments down below what kind of movies you'd like me to see, what kind of videos you'd love of this nature or different you'd like to see in the future. And yeah, I hope to catch you on the next one. Have an amazing day. I'll catch you later. Peace.